Today we're here with Oriol Pascual. He is the co-founder or founder, I would say, no?
Founder and co-founder.
Founder and co-founder of S2Xpeed. So his background is in industrial technology, and he's been working with hardware-enabled startups for the last, 15 years?
15 plus years, yeah.
And then about 4 years ago, you co-founded S2Xpeed, which is an accelerator program that is exclusively accelerating hardware-enabled startups.
Correct.
So, Oriol, thank you for being here today with me and sharing a little bit of your experience and maybe some war stories. First, I wanted to ask you, what really made you decide to focus on this, hardware-enabled startup space, and how would you describe the space in general?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, Roland. Thanks very much for inviting me to this conversation and to this beautiful setup. Well, everything started in 2004. I was living in the Netherlands, and I got the opportunity to set up an acceleration program on clean tech. I never heard what an accelerator was about. This is just at the time that Y Combinator, especially Techstars, were starting in the US. And someone offered me, hey, we are planning to set up an accelerator program for clean technologies. Actually, my background is on clean tech, on environmental engineering. And would you like to help us develop that? So that's how I started my relationship with the startups. Back on the day, this was probably one of the very first accelerators in the Netherlands with this focus. But I started already right away working with science and engineering-based ventures. Since then, it's been a learning process. I did that for 4 years, and then I came back to Barcelona, where I was supporting others setting up programs, always science and engineering-based, till 2014, when I was contracted by this technical university in Barcelona, IQS, to set up the Center of Entrepreneurship, and there decided to put a focus on industrial-oriented startups. And the reason for that was that, look, in Barcelona, in Catalonia, we have a very strong and very mature ecosystem regarding startups, but mostly about consumer-oriented and digital-based startups. That's a wave, or that's an area of the startup ecosystem that was already very mature. At that point, it was emerging very strongly in the so-called biotech and health tech ecosystem here. In that case, it was very much a top-down approach. The local government made a decision to support that development, and that worked very well. And the analysis that we were doing back on the day is like, in Catalonia, we had, and we still have, a very strong industrial sector. At a certain point, 25% of the local GDP was generated by the industry. However, no one is helping develop the next generation of industrial companies. And that was the starting point. And this is 2014. And we started launching a program to support industrial startups without not much of a specific focus, but hey, we want to put that label and to have that specific focus. What we learned very early on is that for new ventures that they are hardware-based, science-based, once they finish the R&D phase, the technology has been validated and it's been proven, lots of challenges were coming. And so our first program was oriented to help those companies go from functional prototype to manufacturing ready stage, because that was the number one pain that the startups were coming to us. We were supporting not only companies or ventures coming out of the research in the university, but also external. And it was a recurring demand of entrepreneurs coming over, bringing a prototype of a medical device, of a robotic solution, and saying, look, we developed this, we've been working on that for the last 3-4 years, it works, it's patented, now I have to produce the first 50 units, 200 units, and I don't know where to start. And we didn't know either how to do that, but we realized, hey, there is a pain point here, let's see how we can help them do that. And we learned on that process. 82 companies went into that program. This was an equity-free program by the university, mostly to position themselves, and then we learn lots of things. We learn a bit more on how to do that process from functional prototype to manufacturing ready stage, but then we identified other pain points that ventures at that stage were having, mostly about market validation. That's typically our companies pre-revenue. Also quite some issues regarding team and operations, especially because they are very technically led ventures, and finally on growth strategy, because on our conversations we realized that they were underestimating how much time, how many resources this whole process will take. And that's the background, but there is also a conviction of why doing that. I mean, at the end of the day, and this is becoming more evident today than 15 years ago, or 10 plus years ago, the need to reinforce the development of companies with high added value component, and that will be locally. So actually, it's been proven that the most competitive economies are those that they have a strong industrial sector, that more than 25% of the GDP comes from the industry, because that generates innovation, but also creates a workforce that is highly skilled and motivated. So a big element for a competitive region, country, or even if we're talking at regional level like Europe, is to have a strong industrial sector. And that's why that bet. In fact, the mission of our organization is to contribute to a more competitive Europe by investing and supporting industrial startups. So there is a mission behind that, and there is a willingness to contribute overall, but also the realization that there is a need for these kind of ventures to receive specific support.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fantastic. And I think in terms of accelerator programs that really purely focus on hardware-enabled startups, I think you're one of the few, if not the only one in Europe.
There are few. There are not that many. Good news is that we've been talking about industrial tech for 15 plus years, and I still remember very well in the first years going around explaining to people like we are supporting industrial startups, and the reaction was like, are there industrial startups? You know, because there is this, we are linking very much entrepreneurship with startups with the first wave of entrepreneurship that will be digitally based and consumer oriented. So, and this is something that has been setting up pretty much how we understand what entrepreneurship is and what are the rules of the game. Yeah. And that's playing against us, if you want, and we can talk about that later on. But the truth is that in the last 3-4 years, that's becoming a more consolidated term and ecosystem. In fact, I believe it was some 4 years ago, Dealroom, the platform, they publish typically these intelligence reports, and for first time they release a report about the state of VC investment in Europe on industrial tech. And I was so happy the day I saw that, because I was, okay, someone with authority, it's already putting the label. So this is starting now. Yeah. And yeah, so it's an emerging sector. I will say inside entrepreneurship, the digital SaaS base, and well, we had the first wave of e-commerce and so on. That's very mature. The biotech, medtech is also very mature. When we talk about more industrial processes and industrial hardware, that it's B2B, because that's our focus. We don't do consumer. That's emerging, but it's growing very quickly. On the second series of those reports, what we learned is that only 3% of VC investments in Europe are oriented in this kind of ventures, but it's been growing 9-fold in the last 5 years. So we see that very rapidly this is evolving, and actually in the last 2-3 years, a bunch of VC-specific funds have been set in Europe with that focus. And when it comes to acceleration programs, although we may be evolving now in the upcoming months, likewise. And when it comes on the reasons, my take is that the playbook hasn't been developed yet, or only some pieces have been developed. For other areas, other sectors, we've been doing so many times that there is officially and unofficially a playbook of what are the different stages, what are the KPIs to look at. You can kind of easily identify if a SaaS solution is going in the right path or not. But when it comes, also in the medical sector, there is a playbook that is written mostly by the regulatory bodies that define different stages and goes and gates and go moments. But for other non-medical engineering-based solutions, more robotics, climate tech, and mobility, if you want, the playbook is not so developed yet. So there is uncertainty around how is the path looking like, and that's my take of why there are not so many players from an acceleration perspective, also from an investment perspective, although it's growing, but it's evolving, and as we are putting pieces of this playbook, this is going to grow even more.
Yeah, it's a bit like the deep tech sector maybe 10, 15 years ago that was very underserved and has now gotten a lot more attention as well. But I guess, I mean, what you're saying is that it's still a bit of an underserved segment. So
totally.
What does that really mean in practice for founders that are in that space?
It means that they need to use lots of creativity, and that there are not that many references they can look at in order to understand the path. In practice, what it means also is that at least one thing that we do, we have inside the program, we bring people that have developed these kind of ventures in the past, that they did for the last 20 years, so they can come and share their learned lessons in that process. But in practice, it means that I would say if we look at the roadmap of an industrial tech or industrial deep tech company, that's how we call it, we can divide it maybe in 3 stages. The first stage, we are using the TRL, the technology readiness level, as our to check milestones. For those not familiar with terminology, you measure the maturity of technology with this scale that was developed by NASA in late 60s to identify the maturity of technologies. In early stages, when you're having an initial idea, an initial concept, and you want to validate that, till the moment that you can validate technology, that's an area that it's quite is not underserved. The other way around, I will say, it's support is there in many ways. You have in technology centers, in universities, in different places, support systems to help entrepreneurs in that process of validating the technology, even to protect the technology. There are different mechanisms in place to license that technology and generate the spin-offs and so on. And it can be some funding in form of non-dilutive funding from different sources. That's the easy part, let's say. Then it comes a second phase, and that's where we are coming, in which you have a technology that is validated, but the market is not validated. That technology, it hasn't been industrialized yet. You're creating the company, and that's more the startup phase. But you have 2 challenges and the sub-challenges of that. One is that, is my technology, can you industrialize it? You know, because that's something that it's overlooked many times. The fact that you develop a prototype doesn't mean that this is going to be good to go to manufacturing stage, neither that it's going to be accepted to be set in an industrial context. So, and all the challenges coming with that. And the second challenge comes with the market validation, because that's not an easy path. Market validation is not the same to validate a SaaS product that you can easily, let's say at the end of the day, it's a service, and there are different creative ways to validate a service. But when talking about an industrial process, or when we're talking about a piece of technology that is a battery-like or something like that, till the moment that you don't have a certain maturity of the technology that you can put it in a context, you are not really going to validate that market. So those are challenges that come with that. And then maybe a third challenge is the financial one, because, and we can talk about that, the different instruments, but there are not that many specialized instruments for that, and that can become challenging.
Yeah. No, I guess also in terms of market validation, it's interesting because SaaS, it's something you can relatively easy pivot around the product, you do testing, and I guess that's a bit harder in the hardware part. But also what I'm interested in is, I guess, we all know about, startup stories, etc. So when hardware founders come, have you seen that they have some, really deep misconceptions about how this journey will actually go for their startup because they're leaning a little bit too much maybe into what's the typical kind of software or SaaS path?
It's like everything. There are different kinds of founders. I mean, and also in SaaS companies, you have the good founders, that is the people that is willing to learn constantly, and realize that they may need to put several hats, that maybe they start with a technical hat, but then they need to put the more managerial, financial hat and CEO hat, and they're able to do the transformation, and those are the good ones. Then you have a group of founders that are very technical. What they enjoy doing is developing that technical dimension. So they may find themselves trapped on this constant technological evolution, and we are trying this feature till we don't have this feature of this technology, we cannot do things, and are difficult to be coached also. But overall, there are not that many well-known references of people that did a path, and that's lacking. When actually we have lots of great examples out there, and sometimes I'm really amazed about the things that we have laying around and we are not that familiar with. For instance, ourselves, I said before, I'm a co-founder because I'm the entrepreneur that created S2Xpeed. But the first thing I did was to surround myself with people that would join this adventure, that had that experience, and mostly that once I will share the challenges that these kind of ventures go through, they will relate. That the reaction will be, I've been there, I know what you're talking about. Because what happens typically in that entrepreneurial ecosystem, if you don't come from that particular corner, is that people don't understand what you're talking about, because they're looking to that through the SaaS lens or through the more traditional digital lens, and then things don't match. And amongst those co-founders, for instance, we have Ruben Bonnet, which is the co-founder of Fractus, and Fractus being the inventors of the fractal antenna. For those that we have an age, we will remember that cell phones had an antenna sticking out, and one day it disappeared. And it disappeared because someone from a technical university in Barcelona created the fractal antenna, which is hidden inside of the cell phones, and actually it's aggregating different bands and antennas. Before that, we had an antenna for the GSM, another one for Bluetooth, another for Wi-Fi. This integrates all these different technologies. Every single phone manufacturer in the world is using Fractus technology out there, and they're paying royalties to that company. This is a company that was born here, that it could be a great case study, and still it's kind of unknown, not just locally, but in general. And I'm thinking of other cases. Also nearby here, we have Pangea Aerospace, which is a company, is the first company that managed to manufacture and function the Aerospike engine, which is a design for rockets that was designed already 50 plus years ago, but it was impossible to manufacture back in the day. But now with new technologies, it's possible to manufacture. This is revolutionary because it's the most efficient engine out there. It's been tried by many all over the world. And actually, it's a local company that managed to produce it, and the first ones to fight it up, and it works. These are the kind of stories that will be great to put out there for new founders to have a reference, and then maybe start seeing that path. Where can it lead? In contraposition, if you are in the SaaS universe, let's say, in a way to simplify the digital, there are many communities and places you can go to learn from others and to share experiences. That's not happening so much in engineering related areas.
Let's talk a little bit more about that specific shift with, the lens, as you say. So what I'm interested in is a little bit on, let's say, the capital structure for hardware companies versus SaaS companies. And in particular, what do you think in general is kind of the path it takes for a company going from a TRL 4 or 5 proof of concept to a manufacturing ready or manufacturing at scale type of level? Like, what kind of investment does that need, and what does that path in general look like?
I will say maybe there are two different, to make a very broad distinction. We can talk about industrial processes. So this is not a product, but it's more a process. So maybe it's about a new material, or it's about reutilization of something.
Antenna, yes.
Well, but that will be maybe more of a product.
Okay.
I'm thinking the one, there is a path for those that produce a product that can happen industrially in an assembly line, or maybe is not 100% industrially. Maybe at the beginning there is a lot of manual assembly happening, but it's about producing large number of units, or relatively large number of units, on a scalable manner, versus those that maybe created a process. What I mean, for instance, is we've been supporting a company from Finland that what they do is to reutilize lignin from pulp plants. This is a subproduct or byproduct, actually, of paper manufacturing, that it has no added value, but through a process that becomes a highly valuable product. But it requires to create these containers and pipes and reactors and chemicals. So it's a process. So maybe that's a distinction. But regardless, for both of them, there is always a first phase that will be about non-dilutive funding. And that is applicable to all sorts of ventures. But I will say, as much as you can grow your venture with non-dilutive funding at the beginning, so you can increase the valuation and you can advance as much as possible without getting investors on board. Lucky enough for IP-intensive ventures, there are several instruments today at European level. That happens locally here, so at the regional level within Spain and Catalonia, but also national level. But also if we go at European level, the European Innovation Council have different non-dilutive solutions, and they are highly competitive instruments to acquire. But if everything is right, you should be able to get 1.5 million in non-dilutive that can be later on be complemented with something else, and you take that and you complement it with other local instruments. It will be more like 300K here, 200K there. So if that's structured properly, there is a window of an opportunity that it takes a specific period of time. I mean, there are going to be 2 years in which you should use this to the max and actually plan for that. Fundraising is both about planning properly, but also about pursuing consistently. It's not happening magically. So we always recommend to do that at the specific time and maximize that opportunity. And also, if you are not able to get some of these funds at the first trial, you can try again later on. So that plays a very important role. I will say that, and I'll put it a bit in the other extreme, especially for these kind of ventures, to get corporate venturing on board, that's a key element, I will say. Again, luckily enough, corporate venturing or ventures developing programs to collaborate with the startups in different forms and shapes have become a norm. Those have been evolving greatly and maturing in the last years, but it's not strange for an industrial established company to have an investment vehicle or some sort of venture client plus investment involved on that. And I will say this plays a key role in this process. Between these two, of course, you have the more traditional investment from business angels and then from established VC funds. And I think business angels especially take an important role. And you can always, and I always say, go to these people that already created industrial company. They may not have a vehicle, but they are going to relate with your industry because maybe it's close to them. So let's go to look for those business angels that not only contribute with cash, but actually they have an understanding of the industry you're going to be playing, and they can contribute a lot in that area. And then, of course, you have VC funds, different vehicles that have been growing. It's difficult to find funds with the label of industrial or industrial tech. So you will go to subcategories. So maybe it's more climate, or it's health tech, or med tech, or it's more construct tech, or now, of course, is dual tech and defense and aerospace. But you need to find your mix there. Yeah. But in that path, my take will be, as soon as possible, once you have a technology that is validated, engage with if we're talking about B2B, engage with corporate customers that they may have vehicles in place, because they may only help you validate the market, but they can support financially that solution. In fact, it's not uncommon in this industry that at certain point, these ventures that they have a difficulty to get VCs on board, they will get industrial shareholders on board that they do majority investments with the aim to end up acquiring the company 2, 3, 4 years after that first participation.
Yeah, VCs, I remember VCs don't like hardware. Generally, they tend to shy away, and there's this conception of non-scalability, etc. But let's talk about that a little bit later. But when it comes to equity raises, we know, pretty well these kind of multiple valuations from SaaS companies, and the typical 10x revenue type of metrics. How does this look for hardware? I suppose the metrics are very different when it comes to valuation.
Maybe not that different. For a fund, the fund will always look for the 10x as the norm.
Yeah.
So that's regardless of the industry and sector you are in. So that will be the norm, and at least that's the starting point. They're looking for opportunities that they can do this 10x. Maybe we can divide pre-revenue and post-revenue. And pre-revenue is like any other industry. Is kind of a standardized valuations based on what stage of development you are, and if it's very early on and so on. But I will say pre-revenue valuations between the 5-10 million, that will be the norm. Below the 5 million will be that they're in very early stage, and maybe it's only about first initial idea and little more, or maybe like some technical validation done in a lab in a very immature or early phase. Post-revenue, then multiples of revenues and EBITDA apply like any other industry. So I wouldn't say is that different. The difficulty here for these kind of ventures is to match their own development and the potential return for the fund with the traditional lifespan of a fund.
Yeah.
Because what's true is that these ventures require more time to develop and to reach that market validation and to get scalability at market level. Once they do, they grow very quickly, but it's true that from that initial technology validation to the market validation, it takes longer. But then, because it takes longer, what a VC is gonna ask, like, hey, if you are pre-revenue, is like,
can I have this exit in 6 years? Maybe
exactly.
7
If you're
months?
knocking the door,
Yes.
if you're knocking the door in year 1, 2, 3 of the fund, that's okay. But if you're knocking the door in year 4, that's not gonna be okay. If it's not that it's foreseeable that you're going to reach that market validation in the upcoming 2 years, because that multiple they're expecting is not going to happen. So that is a challenge that we are dealing with, actually. So aligned in the development of that venture and that market validation with the stage in which the fund is and the expected returns.
And when would you say a hardware startup should really avoid the venture capital space altogether?
I don't know if you can. I mean,
let's maybe keep corporate venture in the game, but I would say the traditional VC fund that is.
Well, no, I think no. Now that I think better, this is a very good question. It happens that you have these kind of ventures, and we experienced that in the past, that are not VC ready, or they are not VC like, especially because what we mentioned about how long it takes to get a return. Then the path is the industrial path. The only way you can go is to go to a leader in that industry that will be willing to make a bet on you, or maybe to start with POCs, or we start with first trials, and they will invest in you, but most probably with the idea to end up acquiring the business. We have seen that happen several times. So that is a path to consider, and it feels weird for the founder, because again, the lens with which we look to entrepreneurship typically is more the SaaS approach. And somehow we understand that if you have VCs investing in you, that's a validation.
Yeah.
It's not a market validation, it's not technical, but it's like, oh, I'm doing things right because someone is putting money on my venture, and look how much I rise, and so on. So the fact that VC says no to you is taken as, okay, this is going nowhere. Not necessarily. There is another path. There is that may end up on an M&A approach, but before that traditional M&A, they are not buying directly a business that it's already running, and that it's already proven. They are making there is an earlier stage in which they are betting in you in that development process, and that can still be a very successful way to lead. If we are talking to other instruments, more like debt related, I see difficulties there. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend that at all. Because that may put you in a very tricky situation. And maybe another thing to take into account is that we typically underestimate how long it takes and how many resources you need to reach certain milestones in this kind of sector. And if you're going for this kind of financing, that can be lethal also.
Yeah, it's the readiness and the top line growth is the other thing we tend to underestimate. Yes, absolutely. Right. But talking about investors going into that space, what do you think? If you have a VC that is willing to go into this sector, what is it that they're really valuing, or how do they evaluate industrial tech startup?
Again, it depends on the stage. If we are going to pre-revenue, I'm going to say things that are going to sound very topical, but it's true that the founding team, it's key, and the attitude that this founding team has, and that's key. That's a number one. Then, of course, you can look more into the technology and how developed is that technology, how mature it is. But before pre-revenue, I will also look for other validations from the market. Maybe you are not selling the product yet, but you manage to run certain projects with potential customers that gives you direct insight. So Those are important elements in this pre-revenue phase. Post-revenue, everything is easier.
Yes.
Basically, that's about the lifespan of a customer, or how much are you generating from a customer, and the margins and things like that. But I will make that distinction.
Mm-hmm. And going more deeper into the venture capital space, there is also obviously this pressure from the venture capital side a little bit on the business model, and they don't tend to like single sales. So selling a piece of hardware is probably less favorable for a VC investor than some kind of more subscription-based model, hardware as a service, call it whatever you want. And I've seen cases where investors are, actively pushing the startup to kind of don't go down that road. But on the other hand, depending a little bit on who the customer is and how that works and how acceptable this kind of business model is, where do you really think that lands? Is this actually some fiction that the VC would like to have, and then at the end of the day, most startups, they maybe try it and then they see it's not really working out, and maybe they have some residual maintenance fees going on, but not a full-on hardware as a service model? Or do you think the market's actually quite open?
It is. I think that has evolved quite a lot. Again, also when we're talking about industrial ventures and hardware ventures, today most of those are intelligent hardware.
Yes.
So that's something we have to remember. That in fact, I always say that many of the opportunities and ventures we provide support, they have a digital innovation that requires an embodiment in some sort of hardware to deliver that innovation to a specific place. And the most visible part, if you want, is the hardware part, but there is that connectivity and that software side. So that's one thing. And we also learn a lot from other industries, like and as you mentioned, hardware as a service. It's a thing, and it's becoming very common for specific solutions. For instance, in robotics, to have robot as a service, in which I'm not selling you a robot for your industrial process or to do whatever. What I'm selling you is a function that will always be there when you need that function, and actually I will replace it the moment that it's a problem with that, but actually that has higher margins than just selling maybe one robot, a specific. And the market is ready for that. That's happening. I think we all got used to subscription-based kind of solutions. So it's true that VCs are looking for replicability, and this kind of engagement. That is applicable in many occasions, in many cases. I would say some mobility solutions, some robotics-related solutions, lots of monitoring. So we do lots of IoT-related things for water management or energy efficiency. They all have embedded. They may have sensors, they may have bulbs, they may have some innovation that it's a hardware-related. But bottom line, you're selling a service that is about doing a more efficient use of resources. So that fits very well there.
I mean, from my point of view, looking, as a CFO, obviously, there are two levels here. One would be, okay, I have my hardware product, which, embodies your digital innovation. I sell you the hardware product, and on top of that, I sell you a typical SaaS product. So I just bundle a SaaS product on top of that. And I think that's great, and I can see that work really well. On the other hand, if you're saying, okay, I have this, 20,000 euro robot, and instead of selling it to you, with maybe some maintenance fees and software, control software subscription afterwards, I'm basically giving you a 20,000 euro robot and I'm charging you per month for this. It makes it 1,000 times more capital intensive, as well as the final client, is now facing these kind of relatively high monthly charges. They might actually be more happy to just kind of have a one-time capex that they can
Right. But the question there is, what is that robot substituting, or what is that robot or that solution contributing to? If we look at it as a device, yes, but maybe that robot is substituting 5 people working, on a specific task. And then you could say, oh, for the price of one person, a monthly cost of one person, now you have the efficiency of 5 people automatized and without other things. So yes, if we look at it in isolation, that makes sense, but we should look at it as, that's also the art of the entrepreneur to say, hey, this is a substitution of a process that is being highly inefficient, so it's cost effective at the end of the day.
Yeah, but from me, if I put myself into the customer's shoes, if I don't want to have that one-time capital outlay, I can always finance the purchase, right? And then I have these monthly charges. But I have that choice, right? If you come with this hardware as a service concept, you're basically imposing this business model on me. So I've always felt that there's a little bit more resistance from the market. And also, let's even think about, consumers. So if you think about consumer market, I personally, if you offer me a device for free and I have to pay subscription, I get pissed off. I want to buy this thing. There's like a health band out there that instead of paying $200, you have to pay whatever €50 subscription per month. There's no way I will buy this personally. I don't like it.
I'm in your team.
Yeah. So I've always been struggling a little bit conceptually with the hardware as a service. And software as a service, I think the change was a bit easier, where also from the vendor perspective, you don't have this big outlay, investment that you have to make. You don't have this capital intensity of scaling your growth. Instead, okay, you make less money in the upfront license, perpetual license, and you get it monthly, and you maybe take a couple of months longer to kind of recover your cost of acquisition. But that's pretty much where it ends. But if I'm having my cost of acquisition, and on top of that, I have that hardware cost that I have to pre-finance, I'm getting a much, much longer, payback period, basically. And that just makes the business model so much more capital intensive. So I've been wondering about, how realistic this really is, and how, I obviously see the benefits of having this long tail of revenue streams, but it's just to me there are a lot of pros and cons, so I don't see it as clear cut as that.
Well, I agree, especially it may be different cases for different solutions and different products out there. And I also, as you were talking, I was thinking that it's also true that in the consumer sector, when you go for a health band that has a subscription attached, or maybe now there are notebooks, e-paper notebooks famously out there, that aside of selling you the product, you have to pay I
have one of those. Yes.
You have one of those. I say, no way. Yes. I went for the alternative. It's true that these kind of solutions, those are things that are nice to have.
Yeah.
And then it's more difficult, at least maybe from your mindset, and my mindset is that I'm not gonna have a recurring cost for something that is nice to have, and that I have alternatives which do not have this attach.
Yeah.
But in industrial sector, that may be different. In the industrial sector, it may be it's not looked through the nice to have lens, it's looked through the efficiency lens. And is this helping me achieve certain output at lower cost or more efficiently? And that's the angle that can be exploited. So if you manage to connect these two, then you have a win. It could be other occasions that may not be possible. So you should go for a more traditional direct sale, and maybe with some servicing on top, as it's been done always. Yeah.
Excellent. So talking a little bit more about also the evolution of the products these days, and as you say, a lot of times we have digital innovation packaged into the into embodiment, as you described it. Where does the AI shift come into that?
It had to happen. Yes. AI is in the conversation. It is there. It is there. We have all these waves. Now we're in the AI waves that definitely it's creating an impact at so many levels, and we all experience that. And we went through the blockchain wave, and we went through the IoT wave. So there is every few years there is a technology wave, that it seems that if you are not in that riding that horse, then you lose it. And we see that also with hardware and with industrial solutions nowadays. That's happening. But it's also true that I would say AI, it's been in industrial processes and products for quite some years now. I already remember more than 10 years ago, Siemens launched these digital twins, replicating processes and factories and things like that. So it's been part of that process, and also prediction in industrial context. It's been there for so long, and I would say even image recognition, so more AI applied to identifying pieces and process is been there for so long. So it's not new. It's not new in that sector. It plays a role. I don't feel that in that ecosystem people is jumping to AI. No, the other way around. Maybe it's seen more as a don't use that term. It's a fad.
SaaS is dead. And,
correct. Yes. So yes, it's playing a role. Yes, it's making job easier. I don't perceive myself that this is something that investors or the market or the final customers are looking for. Oh, is this AI driven? Is this AI driven? I don't see specifically that.
And how about AI in the conceptual phase and prototype development, etc.? Do you think this is going to significantly cut down the amount of time it takes to take something to market?
Well, that's a good one. I don't know if specifically AI. I'm not able to come now with a specific use. At the end of the day, we are all using AI in our day-to-day activities, professionally, to plan for things, to analyze things, to organize information. So that definitely plays a role. But it's true that overall, digital fabrication and the democratization or commoditization of some manufacturing processes, that has accelerated that process. So nowadays, in prototyping phases, it's kind of easy to prototype a PCB, to prototype a casing, to prototype, to build mechanical parts. Today, you can do that quite quickly, locally at reduced cost versus 10 years ago, let's say. So that,
3D
but overall, correct.
Correct.
So digitalization of manufacturing processes and the commoditization of that and the accessibility of that, that has accelerated. I wouldn't say specifically AI. I'm sure it's playing a role, but I will look at it more from the digital fabrication perspective.
Okay. One thing I wanted to come back on is on the funding side. There are obviously some, a little more unconventional funding mechanisms out there. So what do you think about something like Kickstarter, for example?
Kickstarter, first of all, it only works for consumer-oriented products. So this is not something we are doing. Although we had experience, or myself, I had experience in the past with ventures we supported. At a certain point, at the beginning of my career, we were supporting hardware-based, both B2B and B2C. And we have seen successful cases using Kickstarter. So if you have a consumer product, Kickstarter can be a great way. One is to finance early stages, although it comes with lots of dangers, and we can talk a bit about that. But I will say also, when executed properly, can be a great way to get publicity, to get partnerships, to show interest and validation, and maybe not necessarily through the whatever, 300K or whatever you're raising through the campaign. So that's definitely an option. That's definitely a path. Let's also realize that launching a campaign in Kickstarter, if you want to do things right, is costly. It needs planification. It needs a strategy. And sometimes people tend to think like, oh, I just launched a campaign in Kickstarter and it will magically happen. Well, no, you need to produce a very good video.
Yeah.
And you already have to have a good product to show on that video. Already that piece, the video, can cost you some money. You need to think of the whole campaign, how you're managing the campaign. Also, if you want to have some success, you cannot start from scratch. You need to make sure that in the first days, you already have an army of people that is willing to do that. So you see the machine moving and so on. It takes, and you may do that also. You may do some A/B testing before doing that. To convert. Here, the more traditional lean startup approach can help a lot to run A/B testing on Facebook or Google Ads, whatever, to see potential conversion rates and click rates of like, hey, for every euro that I spent, is this potentially converting in how much? In 2 euros of a potential sale or 3 euros or so? Okay, there is something here. And you need to do, I would say you need to do that together, hand in hand with an agency that are specialized, highly specialized agencies for that. And even some of those, they have their own investment vehicle. In fact, the good ones, what they do, they may do this A/B testing for you for free. But if they see good numbers, they'll say, look, we're going to run that. The campaign is on us. But we're taking a take on the company. Yeah. It's definitely a path, but clearly for consumer products, you need to understand which categories work and which categories do not work also. And there is a universe on its own. You need to do that. Don't do it on your own. Don't think like, oh,
I put my video up and then I get,
it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We have other for non-consumer oriented. We have some platforms that will be equity-based crowdfunding.
Yes.
And some specialized ones, maybe not so much for industrial process, but yes, for health-related, that they work well. But also, once again, if you want to successfully do that, 20-30% of that round you're aiming to do, you should have it already committed before launching.
Yeah, probably more. Yes.
But minimum, don't think like, oh, I'm launching a campaign in one of these equity-based funding, it's zero, and magically, no. On day one, you need to make sure that at least, 20-30% is going to be already deployed, and then hopefully through good marketing and good strategy, you may reach that goal.
Excellent. Yeah. No, the momentum, I think, in crowdfunding is super important. So yes, I have actually done equity crowdfunding rounds for some of my clients, and it's, you bring 40-50% committed before you open. You need to work with the business angels to, have those tickets ready to go on day one.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's also, as you said, it's a great vehicle to aggregate individuals, so for the business angels, and to say, we're going to do everything through that platform. That makes things way easier for you. You don't have to deal later on then with a bunch of business angels with small tickets.
And if you can get them into a vehicle or
Right. That works.
Yes. No, great. I want to pivot a little bit and let's talk about the role of a CFO in a hardware startup.
All right.
So, first of all, at what stage do you think a hardware startup should start working with a CFO, maybe even fractional, or start bringing in somebody with more strategic thought on finance? Is this something that you think it's while they're still thinking about the prototype, or when they're starting to go into early stage manufacturing, etc.?
I will say as early as possible, because something we see with the kind of ventures we provide support is that financials are typically neglected, or in a large way they are neglected. And if you are serious in that game, either you become, you learn yourself if you don't have the skills and you don't have you need to learn. But I would say as soon as possible, have someone on board that can help you structure your finances. And as you know, especially in the early phases, even if it's for something as basic but as deadly as cash flow management.
Yes.
We see so many cases of companies that basically they don't realize that they have 3, 4 months, 6 months of runway, you know, and they're hoping for the best to happen. And well, why don't you review your cash flow on weekly basis, you know, and then see what needs to be done in advance and so on. So I will say successful ventures that we saw, they got a fractional CFO very early in the process. And the good ones, the CEO has been sitting with the CFO on weekly basis to learn the basics and to be able to translate that information, because that's gonna become key. So I will say as soon as possible. As soon as possible.
So for me, one of the things that have always been, preoccupying me with hardware is obviously once you develop something, it's really hard to change later. And I've always had this gross margin concern, obviously, right? There is a certain willingness to pay. And if your product ends up being too expensive in, design and manufacturing, then you're destroying your gross margin. And actually, as I do teach the pricing strategy in S2Xpeed, one of the things that I'm emphasizing is the need of doing the pricing strategy and the price discovery really early on in the prototyping phase, where you have this idea of building something aimed at a certain price point, so you're not going into this trap of over-engineering. And we know, technology founders, they love the technology, they fall in love with the product,
right.
And they tend to think the more features they build into the product, the better it is. And I think that can severely backfire later and basically destroy their gross margins in the long run. So
that's true. And actually, I think this is a very valid point to look the other way around. What is your goal of selling price? And then, okay, how can I deliver certain functionality, taking into account that's going to be the price and that's the margin that I want to have and so on, rather than the other way around. That's what typically happens.
You know the Ford Mustang story, no?
No, tell me.
So Ford, back when they launched the Mustang, before the Mustang was around, the only sports cars that were around of this type, they were really highly engineered. They were super expensive, and nobody could really afford them. And so what Ford did is they did a market study on who wants to actually buy these cars, and it was a certain type of younger males,
right?
And they looked at, okay, what are they really looking for? And they realized, okay, it's not so much about the technology, it's about the lifestyle that the car brings. So they didn't care about horsepowers or acceleration. I mean, yes, it has to be fast, but if it's fast or very fast, nobody cares.
Right.
And so what Ford did is they basically came up with a price point for the Mustang and then gave that to the engineering department. And the engineering department had to build a really, really shitty sports car, essentially, and take it out to market. And it was one of the most successful car launches in the history of cars. And then they developed like a premium model that they would send to like the races and these kind of things to kind of build up the brand image a bit more. But the basic Ford Mustang, this was the story. And this was like one of the first times in pricing that this was done this way, especially in the car industry. And I think nowadays, if you look at industries that are so consolidated, that is really what they're doing nowadays. But I like to kind of instill that thought when I talk to founders about pricing. And sometimes it's a little bit late in the game, so they have a lot of this developed already, but But
it's good to do it regardless in that moment. Yes.
Like, who do you want to sell this to and why? And then build the product specifically and for that specific.
That's a good story. I wasn't aware of that, and I will use that if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. I love that story. I was included in the workshops as well. Yes.
Fantastic.
I wanted to talk to you about supply chain. Okay, so there have been, recently, obviously, a couple of supply chain disruptions with COVID. We have wars going on once in a while. What's your take on outsourcing production to Asia, for example, or reshoring it and keeping a shorter supply chain. Where do you think people should start? How should they think about this in general?
Well, first and foremost, I'm all for European sovereignty. So, and not only from now, it's been many years. But this is more a stand, a political stand, if you want, or a geopolitical stand. But it's also true that we've been always recommending that at least in earlier phases, produce things locally and get your suppliers and your contract manufacturers locally. There is this temptation of, let's go to Asia. I mean, of course, it's great place, but maybe once you have big volumes, once you've been learning lots of the steps and the process. One of the difficulties that ventures have, the ventures that we support, is to manage. So typically for these hardware products we're talking about, rarely any of those startups is going to build a factory to manufacture it. Typically, they will come to an agreement with a contract manufacturer. But most contract manufacturers, one of the difficulties they can have is that most contract manufacturers, they're not going to have a conversation with a startup that has zero experience in the process, that is going to make them waste lots of time and resources. They're basically going to say no. So one of the things that we do in our program is to prepare the companies so they do the homework. So when they knock the door of a contract manufacturer, the contract manufacturer may say, hey, that may be the first time you're doing that, but you came prepared. You came well prepared to do that. So if we take into account that regardless you're going to have this difficulty, it doesn't matter if that contract manufacturer is here or it's somewhere else, it's in China. And if we are adding layers like cultural differences and language differences, the fact that you need to take a plane every time, the fact that you're going to receive pieces and it's going to take time and so on, that to do iterations in earlier phases is not worth the hassle.
Yeah.
Better thing you do is that you are a car drive away from your supplier or your contract manufacturers, that you can easily, if they call you like, hey, we have run into this problem, you're there, you see the problem together, you look at solution together, you speak in the same language, and then you go back. So that said, later on, and we're not talking about consumer products. I mean, we're not talking about doing thousands of units on the get-go. Maybe it makes sense later on when you have the product is being optimized, the process is being optimized, maybe you have version 2 of your program and so on, then you may consider if you go somewhere else in order to reduce manufacturing cost and so on. That may make sense. But my take will be to look locally or at European level, and also because we need it. We need it. We need to make that bet. Yeah, it's very important.
And in terms of volumes, if you go to a contract manufacturer, is there typically a minimum volume that you need to?
But it depends
maintain,
it depends on the product category we're talking about, and the difficulty of assembly. Nowadays, if we're talking about the small hardware like wearables or maybe some sensors or things like that, even PCB manufacturers, they may offer the assembly. I mean, they can do the whole process for you. Not only they may manufacture the PCB, but they will be happy if you provide them with the casing and then you provide them with the manuals, and they can do that, and they can do that from small units to a certain volume, but not that big. If we're talking about medical devices, well, of course, it depends on product category. I wouldn't be able to give you hard numbers for every product category, but it needs to make sense. Yeah. It's also true that sometimes we collaborate with engineering firms that they can do short series. So maybe before you go to a contract manufacturer, you've been working with a product engineering firm that they can do short series for you, like 200 units or 500 units of something. And And that's a good first step before going to a contract manufacturer that maybe it's going to go more for the thousands of units. And there are some of those. Yeah.
Yeah, and you might just take a little bit of cut on your profitability on your early units, but you're putting your price point with
Correct.
A view on a long term. Yes.
Correct.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Now, having that local idea, and I think that also goes in line with Europe trying to get more of this sovereignty on certain sectors, and specifically, as we said, medtech, clean tech, energy, renewables, etc. So, how do you think that this political agenda that we have is going to change maybe the landscape a little bit over the next couple of years?
I would like to think that it's going to have an influence, but reality is that, well, I hope that the times we are living are making European leaders at different level to start coordinating and to be more action-oriented. But the reality is that it's very difficult. And my frustration, especially in those times that we are living, is that the diagnostic is clear on what's needed. The recipes are clear. We had this Draghi report and Letta report, and we have lots of proposals on the table. Still, coordination is not happening to make these things happen. We see some elements so overall we need to align the different leaderships in Europe to think at European level, not at national level. We see some initiatives that are promising, not in our sector, but maybe the financial sector. So now there is an initiative in order to have these electronic payment systems at global European level and cutting the credit cards from the US. That's very promising. We see other initiatives, like it's been recently launched, this EU Inc. Initiative,
yes,
in order so it will be very easy to set up a new company in Europe in very short period of time at very low cost, and that will have validity across Europe. That's a big step. And I think there are opportunities out there. What's happening in Ukraine now, for instance, regarding defense, that's an amazing opportunity from European level to tap into, to get Ukraine inside of the EU and to tap all this knowledge and infrastructure that has been built in a record time in order to be more sovereign from a defense perspective. I mean, that's the best thing that could happen. So I hope that this happens. Mm-hmm. So all in all, I see initiatives popping up in different areas. Maybe things are not happening as fast as they should. We like bureaucracy. I mean, our culture in Europe is about having everyone happy and coordinating everyone. That means that we spend lots of time discussing things so we can all go in the same page. They make us less efficient. We spend more stuff talking and less doing. We need to coordinate between our value system and what is most efficient. But I think we need more action, mm-hmm. and hopefully we're going to see. Well, now that you mention it, it comes to my mind. Recently, I started seeing examples of venture funds that they are using the argument of European sovereignty as their driving factor, and the whole investment thesis is based on that. And this is new.
Yeah.
This is new. I can have a specific example. There is a fund in Denmark called Final Frontier. Mm-hmm. It's a small fund, 5 million, but now they are launching the second fund that is going to be hopefully around the 100 million fund. It's on aerospace and dual tech defense. If you go to their website, and we know them and we've been interacting with them, everything is about the role of Europe and how we can regain, this past industrial, and how can we again be a key player in innovation globally, and so on and so forth. So it's happening. Hopefully there are more initiatives happening, and hopefully also the geopolitical landscape we are living is going to push us towards that kind of approach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which sector would you say is the most promising for Europe in your area? Let's say, I don't know, is it semiconductors or?
Well, that's a battle that I think we can forget about. That's not going to be an easy one. Maybe the specific case of semiconductors. No, what I will say is that the medical tech ecosystem, it's a very mature one at European level. We have lots of specialized investment in this area. We have large pharmaceutical and biotech companies there that can become the customers and the end buyers of those technologies. So that's definitely a consolidated one. And I think it has a long trajectory to go. Then I will say also climate tech. And climate tech, sometimes people talk more about impact related, but that's another big sector. And that's because at European level, we've been having these policies regarding environmental issues and cutting emissions. And that's also part of our value system. And there is lots of potentiality there. And then for other sectors, maybe it's a mixed bag. In robotics, that's a good one. Again, going back to Denmark, in Denmark, there is a big ecosystem regarding robotics that can be utilized. I would say it's more of a mixed bag. More than promising, I will say that there are established sectors like medical devices, for instance, that's big, and then anything that would be climate related, so energy related and water management. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And as a final question for today, if you could have one, change in the European, let's say, startup ecosystem, maybe specifically on your segment or maybe generally, what would that be? What would you change?
I don't know if I will change. I would like that in our sector and industry, the more the industrial deep tech, we will have reached maturity. And we are not there yet. But that's something, this is like asking a little kid that, no, you have to go from 3 years of age to 15 years of age in half a second. No, that's not going to happen. You need to go through that. And it's through the evolution and the learning that you will end up becoming a mature ecosystem. So I say that because we tend to compare ourselves to other places in the world, and they say, because there they do it like this, there, and here we do like that. And I tend to think that it's not so much because the ingredients are different. They started 80 years before we did. I don't know in other regions, and I don't know in Germany, but in Barcelona, the first VC fund was established in the year 2000. That's 26 years ago. It may seem a lot, but it's not a lot.
Yeah.
The first VC fund, before that, we had no VC funds in Barcelona, in a city like Barcelona. So it takes time. It takes time, and we need to acknowledge that it takes time. But if we acknowledge that it takes time, and then the different players were willing to contribute and maybe to push, and many we are doing, or can we write the playbook on how things are done? Can we share experiences? Can we put the focus on those that already did in the past, and can we learn lessons? We need to walk that path. Yes, ideally we will be more mature, so it will be easier for these kind of ventures to bring those innovations and technologies to the market, and then we'll be more playing a more important role. But it's a process, and we need to go through that process, and it's the learning is beautiful also, so we need to do that. I wouldn't say so much about changing. We just need to walk the path.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time today, and thanks for helping people to walk the path and writing the playbook with the accelerator and all the work that you do. And it's been great to have you as a guest.
Thank you very much, Roland. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.